Today, the purpose of the meeting is really to talk about the growth patterns in Pitkin County. We are going to take a look quickly at information that we've gathered, and I think Ellen's going to do the bulk of looking, of walking us through that data that she has already gone over once recently, if you've caught it, with the Board of County Commissioners. But we have as we've been discussing all the growth issues, we want to make sure that we have some of our foundational zoning questions answered. And one of the main questions is that of a pattern of growth in Pitkin County. Right now, Zach, I don't know if you're moving through that or if I should turn this over to Ellen, but we have several questions that we want to walk through and ask you about in terms of the patterns of growth in Pitkin County. Today, we've been talking, well, up until now, we've been talking a lot about how we have used our land use code to influence this existing pattern of growth, which is basically an urban growth pattern, urban area, urban boundaries around the communities. And then as you move out from the communities, less and less development, all the way to our national forests and federal lands, Bureau of Land Management lands, of which there are about 85% in Picken County. So we really are only looking at 15% of private lands that can be developed in the county, and where those are developed is crucial in terms of a lot of things we've been talking about. Climate action, is there a good way for people to get to work? Are we looking at patterns that make sense from our resort community perspective? So there's a lot to look at, and I think from there I'll turn it over to Ellen.
Thanks, Cindy. So we can go to the next slide here. So the quote, Zach, thanks.
Mine's still showing the initial slide.
Yeah. Well, I'll go ahead and jump into it. Basically, the first topic that Cindy introduced was the question of whether the current development patterns that we have, basically from Aspen all the way down to Basalt within Pitkin County, are still accomplishing our community objectives. And so what does that growth pattern look like? Yeah, let's start with that slide. Thanks, Zach. Can everyone, I hope that your screens are large enough to make this graphic legible. At the left side of your screen, what you're looking at in pink is the municipal boundary for Aspen. And then there's a crosshatch just beyond that, down to the end of the airport runway. Can't read the crosshatch very well, but that area outside of the pink area, the municipal boundary, is Aspen's identified urban growth boundary area. And that urban growth boundary area is generally defined as an area outside of the municipal boundary that might at some point be appropriate for annexation and more urban development, as opposed to more rural development in the outlying areas. So then at the middle of your screen, the big pink blob there is the municipal boundary for Snowmass Village, which is bigger than you would think it would be. The center there where Zach has got his cursor is showing really where the Snowmass Village proper is located. And then the area that is to the right of that and comes all down to the highway is Wildcat Ranch. So that's actually was annexed to the town several years back and makes the town look, well, as big as it is, but that's primarily still a very low density rural area, though it is within the town boundary. And then if you go further down the highway, following Zach's cursor, you've got the town of Basalt on the far right end of your screen. Again, there's the municipal boundary that Zach is identifying. And then they also have identified an urban growth boundary area where it may be appropriate at some point to have more urban levels of development outside of the municipal boundary. So as you can see, there's some green dots on the screen as well. Those are all RAFTA bus stops. They're not all BRT stops, obviously. Those are just all of the bus stops that exist that connect all three of these urban areas, primarily along the highway. So as you can see, there's still a lot of green space, open areas between the existing urban areas. So next slide, if we could. Historically, Picken County has had a land use policy in place to maintain a distinction between those urban areas and to deliberately avoid sprawl. So by sprawl, we're talking about developing at urban levels all the way down the highway from Aspen to Basalt as a worst case scenario. And this has been basically supported by municipalities in the unincorporated portion of Picken County, including Basalt and Snowmass. So why avoid sprawl? Basically, again, to maintain the rural entrance to towns. When people come to this mountain area, they like to drive into the towns and drive through the rural agricultural lands that exist today. It's part of the mountain experience. And again, there's a clear distinction between the towns that I think everybody appreciates. In addition to just the visual rural entrance to towns, there's another component of sprawl, and that is trying to be fiscally responsible and limiting the inefficient expansion of infrastructure and services outside of developed areas. So by infrastructure, right, we're talking about water and sand districts and utilities, among other infrastructure needs associated with development. Again, to the next slide, just looking again at the lay of the land. This is another great, I think it's a great graphic, and it just shows that there is still clearly some rural areas, undeveloped areas, agricultural lands, open space between the municipalities. So next slide, there's historically been support for this lay of the land, for the land use pattern in almost all of the county master plans. There's one of the primary themes of the master plans has been preservation of rural character. And that doesn't just doesn't hold true for the Picken County master plans. It also a lot of support for rural character in the Aspen area community plan, and also in the Basalt master plan and the Snowmass master plan. So a lot of support there. At the same time, over the last decade, we've been getting some development pressure for some of the areas, specifically along Highway 82. And the development pressures have been around, as everybody I think knows, affordable housing needs. Land in Aspen in particular, which is one of the employment centers, is expensive, and there's a need for affordable housing in it. It's tough to develop in Aspen because of land prices in part. And then down at the other end of the valley, what we're calling the Pitkin Basalt Junction area, the area right outside of Basalt, just up valley from Basalt, up to the Snowmass Conoco station. That whole area has historically contained locally serving commercial businesses. And so they're not They're not rural businesses per se. They have a very important function for the whole valley. And so there's more and more development pressure in that area to maintain existing commercial uses and potentially to develop some more affordable housing in that area. It's in close proximity to the town of Salt. There's some transit available, but to what extent should that area continue to be somewhat of a rural entrance for the town of Basalt? And how far out should that sort of development go? Next slide, thanks. So is there another development pattern that would serve the community better? Such as focusing development along the highway or creating high density pockets. One of the other high density areas that's been contemplated over the years is the Brush Creek Intercept lot in that immediate vicinity. Right now, it's the base of Snowmass Village entrance and somewhat of an entrance to the town of Aspen or the city of Aspen. And there's been some pressure to develop affordable housing there as an option, or we've had a lot of different options thrown out there, including commercial development that relates to the transit there, things like cafes, coffee shop, restaurants, daycare. And then we've also had some interest in affordable housing in the immediate vicinity, just outside of that transit station. So we're looking at some development pressure that may result in a different direction in terms of whether or not we keep all of the urban level densities and development within the urban areas, or whether there's a different pattern that we should be considering when we're looking at zoning along the highway outside of the urban areas. And that's a little bit of background to help facilitate the discussion. The discussion, and at that, if we could go to the next slide, thanks. Again, just to go back to the gray graphic here to show that there is still a really good distinction. Communities have maintained their separate identities and character due to the separation and the green open spaces in between. Should that change? And with that, I think the next slide is one that I'm going to turn over to, let's see what the next slide is, to Zach. Right, well, so this will back to that last slide. I had to include Cindy's reference to the potential, if we do change zoning and do change that land use pattern, we may lose the character of our distinct separate communities. We may no longer be limiting the cost of infrastructure as it sprawls down the valley to serve sprawling development. And do we still want to avoid the creation of, as Cindy referred to it, the town of Roaring Fork Valley? That's an extreme, but that's a part of the discussion. So next slide, again, is just looking at the overview. It's a good bird's eye view of what it looks like today. And then
the next one is the question, but before we moved on to the next question, I thought it'd be worthwhile to let people ask questions or actually comment on their answer to it, rather than giving them all 3 questions and just downloading. I think we should keep this more interactive. So if you have any comments or if you have an answer to our question, I've given you all the ability to unmute yourself and respond. So please feel free to just jump in.
That would be great. And don't be shy.
To go back real quick.
I'll offer something if no one
Sure.
else is going to speak. Hey, thanks. Good to see you all again. Sorry I missed last week. I find myself looking at this stuff and thinking back to the commuter pattern element of the regional housing study that was done. and sort of like wanting to kind of lay those on top of each other, these sort of, the distinct towns and the degree to which they're connected or not. And from a land use perspective, these graphics are amazing. They're so telling, and they're just excellent. But I am like kind of in my mind overlaying within that this sort of the flow of people between them. And I think understanding that, and I don't suggest that I have a deep understanding, but just maybe there's kind of the people movement and use patterns of the towns we live in versus the towns we work in that we should be considering alongside this, because I think the assumptions that there are the land use sort of segmentation or segregation, clearly it's there as we look at the graphic, but that people flow is I think every bit as important and worth considering as we discuss this.
So
Yeah.
thank you. You teed that up well. We will jump into that very graphic in a minute, or right now if Zach would like to.
Yeah, and I
Just let others
guess
speak.
they all flow in as well. But just so people can understand what you're seeing here, this shows commuter patterns based on the town. So the more solid blue that's the out commuting. The lighter blue is the total employed residents. So you can really see that Aspen, obviously there's not very many people going down valley. The Salt area, predominantly people are flowing up valley. Carbondale is the largest commuter by percentage. So this is also based on percentage. This doesn't reflect actual numbers. So by percentage, Carbondale is the largest exporter of workers to the Up Valley area, and then followed by Glenwood. So Glenwood is sending a lot. There's a couple being diverted off into the Carbondale area, but predominantly all of the Glenwood ones are heading up to Aspen as well. And then there's also a trickle coming up from the below Glenwood Springs area. So you can see they hit Glenwood and then they go up. So when you combine all of those commuter patterns together, you end up with that traffic flow that we've seen and that influx of workers that we all experience. And then this bottom one shows total employment. So the dense orange is the locally employed residents versus the lighter orange, which is the employed population that's coming from out of the area. So you can see that Aspen, the majority of its workflows is commuter, whereas the lower areas tend to have a closer balance between commuters and locally living workers. And so that's part of what you were just talking about, Michael.
Right.
So if anybody has any comments on all of that, do we want to see greater density? Do we want to keep it where we have these pockets? Do we think some extra pockets are worth having? Please feel free to chime in.
Hi there, it's Phi. I don't know, do we have a choice on some level in terms of greater density, just given the population increases and the job demand, employment demands, patterns that we've talked about?
If I could answer really quickly, I'm not going to give you the answer because I really don't know the answer, but I think what we're trying to outline today and debate or discuss or just have comments around are that, there's the pattern of urban growth boundaries, traditionally, having more development within the urban growth boundary, and then less development in between the various communities. There's the discussion of whether or not development could be put at traditionally called transit-oriented development stops, which are not traditional or incorporated communities along the highway. We've got Aspen Village already as a large, employment area, if you will, and transit-oriented development. And you've got the ability maybe to look at a couple more of those along the highway, which is a different land use pattern today. And then something we haven't brought up today, but I think it was brought up a couple weeks ago, and that is looking at, rather than growing looking at shifting the balance within the existing urban growth boundaries. Would there be policies or regulations and even growth management direction that could require that there not be new development, but buy down of existing development to potentially be deed restricted, so that what you saw on the graph, there would be more people living where they're working, but not actually expanding development in that case. So I hope that kind of outlines a couple of ways of approaching this and looking at this discussion today and trying to sense where people are on that. An interesting thing happened, I'll just throw out there, when I was looking over some numbers this week. Someone asked me the question of how many permanent residents and how many part-time residents there were. And we had some numbers from Gabe Preston's reports on that. And then Zach quickly gave me the percentages on that. And, you know, it looks like we've got about, 64% permanent residents and 36% part-time residents in Pitkin County. But what we're experiencing today, here right now, and why people are feeling like, oh my gosh, we're so full, and the enrollments in school and all of that, I think those 36% part-time residents are now full-time residents. So we're looking at kind of a 60-40 split traditionally in our seasonal kind of community that we've had, but now we're looking at more of a full-time community with all of the housing that we have today. And that now feels like, a 40% increase in our population all of a sudden. So that's like, if you will, a worst case scenario for resources and traffic impacts and things that several people asked us to follow up on for later in this discussion. So I just wanted to throw that out there as a number that we're experiencing right now today. But the real discussion, I'm sorry I got off track, but the real discussion today is on that land use pattern. Do we rebalance what we have within our urban growth boundaries? Do we maintain our urban growth boundaries? Or do we see that there is merit in having additional development, theoretically transit oriented along the highways, but between the existing communities?
And Kim had a question that was asking about Old Snowmass, and I think it's worthwhile clarifying. She was asking where Old Snowmass falls in all of this. And so these are the only incorporated municipalities in Picken County. Redstone is technically part of unincorporated Picken County. They have some unique zoning. Meredith, Lanedo, Old Snowmass are all technically unincorporated parts of Picken County. They are not their own distinct municipalities. So when we talk about perhaps other areas to maybe create pockets of densities, those existing ones, like maybe those are areas that we're talking about as well.
And Kim, just to follow up, I think that the intersection of Old Snowmass and Highway 82 is one of those discussion points. Should there be transit-oriented development, at a high density there? Is that a pocket that could be considered for transit-oriented development?
Cindy, it's Suzanne.
Hi, Suzanne.
Hi. It seems to me that I understand what you're describing about those pockets at transit hubs and all, but it also seems to me that could quickly turn into sprawl. And I can't imagine that we would choose sprawl over what we have right now. I love the idea, and I would certainly vote 1,000 times over for changing the balance within the boundaries that we have right now. But I couldn't possibly support any version of sprawl until we can come up with, say, 10 really good ideas about or examples of communities who've created really nice sprawl that's been helpful to them and that has been efficient and that has a scenic value, and which is part of what we sell, the way we make money here. I can't imagine doing that.
Thank you for those comments. And those are the kinds of comments that we are seeking today. Do people have strong feelings, you know, amongst yourself? And just to give you some freedom in all of that, you know, you don't have to be preaching the, you know, concepts that have been here forever or whatever. We do want to hear your comments. And just to give you a little bit of background, I mean, we debate that every day, even among staff. And we have some very strong feelings about it, but there is a legitimate debate that I would love to have today, if you feel differently than the traditional. And if not, if you feel that what we have established through the years with our land use patterns here, which is the distinct separation of the communities, if people feel that way, then, you know, great, and we can move on to other discussions that we need to cover.
Susan Welsh, I see your hand up as well, so please feel free to chime in.
Yeah.
Cindy, may I layer a question on top of what you just said, just to have all of us thinking about, as we talk about transit-oriented development, the assumption there is that if someone is living near enough to transit, that they will take it. And the job that they're doing and where they're doing that job has an equal impact on whether or not they can take it. And going back to Gabe's first meeting presentation about the 2,900 jobs just on the service side that will be generated by the full build out of residential, most of those jobs cannot be served by transit in its current form. So, and I think this is where, like, putting on the resort guy hat for a second, that, you know, like when we and I've seen it because I'm a bus rider, the hotel workers down valley have dramatically moved on to transit over the years because they can, because you know, they can get to it. So if you get on a bus at 8th Street at 7:30 in the morning going into town, which I do sometimes to go to Rotary, you know, it's stop at Pepke Park. Half of it'll unload right there for all the hotel workers to get out for those hotels. And then at Ruby Park, they all get out to go to the hotels there. So like the way that employment job type kind of lays over, you know, this conversation. And I think that the job generation piece of residential development that Gabe pointed to is something we need to be considering, and there probably are plenty of jobs in the core that people could move into TOD and then would get onto transit. But I don't want us to make an assumption that everybody who moved into those places would be doing a job that could be served by a bus.
Really good point. Thank you. Yeah. A lot of the housing that requires services, the landscaping, through the construction phase, but the landscaping, the maintenance of the structure, the housekeeping, whatever those jobs are, those don't have the ability to access in our land use pattern transit. They are typically single occupancy or occupancy by like workers in one vehicle or two vehicles.
Susan, I see you've unmuted yourself. Please feel free to chime in.
All right. I think all of us would rather have the population not grow, but that's just what happens. I agree with Suzanne. Sprawl, I think, would be terrible. It'd be like so many other cities that started out as towns and they're now cities, and they just keep going on and on. I do like the boundaries, so we have open space. The other thing that I've noticed that when you go into a town and they have a PUD, a planned unit development, it seems to be done better than if you have people just having little houses or apartment buildings, because they really put in the green belts that people need, and maybe ponds and walking spaces. And so, but personally, I absolutely feel like we shouldn't expand from what we have planned right now in the urban areas.
Well, thank you, Susan, and everybody. That's great feedback. I'm going to ask for a little more feedback on two specific topics. One, I think to put some things in context for our elected officials, while I think most of them absolutely agree that sprawl is not a good solution to anything, there's a lot of pressure for building of affordable housing. And I think they really are struggling to some extent with how to deal with that pressure and where affordable housing should go. That's just to put a little bit of context on that piece of the equation. But another area that I briefly identified where we may be looking at, I don't know that it would be called sprawl, but the area just outside Up Valley of Basalt, the Picken Basalt Junction EBJ area, we're referring to it as now. That area actually, it's outside of the municipal boundary. It has historically contained locally serving commercial businesses and some light industrial uses. There is some interest in changing zoning there to accommodate the existing uses outside of the municipal area without going too far and causing it to become sprawl with more housing and potential urban development out beyond what's existing there today. So is there any feedback on how the county should be looking at zoning and in that particular area, the Pitkin Basalt Junction area, in terms of whether the area that's already outside of the municipal boundary, whether that area should be zoned so that it may continue to function in its current use without being allowed to necessarily expand? Is that a good idea, or should we just be looking at the current zoning, which really only allows for residential use in that area? Should there be some change in that area, which is immediately adjacent to the town of Basalt?
Could you show a map of that?
Yeah, it's actually, we don't have I don't think we have a detailed map, but, oh, there's the detailed map. Thank you, Zach. Yes, so what you've got there is on the left-hand side of the screen, the uppermost corner is the area closest to the municipal boundary of Basalt, which is in red. That boundary is outlined in red. And then the yellow edge there is the area we're referring to, immediately adjacent to the town municipal boundary, and then coming up the highway all the way up to the Snowmass Conoco, basically to that area, and then just immediately adjacent to the highway. That's the area we're looking at, the area I was referring to that already contains that mostly, there's some residential development in there, and then but there's a lot of locally serving commercial businesses right along the highway. And that's one of the areas we're looking at in terms of, well, is this going to be, should we change zoning to accommodate what's there and no more, or not? Is that feeling like sprawl? And where do you draw the limits? Is that
May I just say something? Am I muted?
No, you're talking.
Oh, all right. I've spent a lot of time in New Zealand, and our sister city is Queenstown. For the last almost 20 years, Queenstown will not let there be any development where the road going into Queenstown has to see any buildings. Now that's really something. And they've been able to keep that beautiful. And it looks like a lot of rolling hills. We don't have quite the rolling hills where you can put employee housing or other housing behind the rolling hills. But it does make Queenstown quite beautiful. And that's one thing that I think that makes our area so beautiful, is that we just don't have all these buildings everywhere. And if there's any way to maybe soften it with even berms, that might be a thought, because Queenstown has really done a beautiful job.
I think Burlingame fits that kind of success story narrative, that it's tucked away, that it's a beautiful place to live, but you don't know it's there. You never see it.
Yeah, that's nice.
But if we continue to say, well, something has sprawled up there out of the ground, and so we will rezone it to permit it, then what we continue to do is change the character of an area, and then anybody else who comes in for an approval can say, yes, I'm in character with the area because look at what you just rezoned right down there. I think that we either, as Cindy has put it in the past, maybe we need to decide at some point to zone it like we mean it. And instead of, well, I'll tell you this quick story about my late husband, Jack, was playing in the backyard when he was about 10 years old with other boys whose mothers were inside playing bridge. And the boys got into some sort of squabble and came in, and the mother said, no, you can't play anymore. You all cannot play that game anymore. And the children pleaded and, please let us. And so finally one mother said, you can run and you can block, but you cannot tackle. So that's the kind of thing that we're saying, as long as if we keep bargaining with ourselves and other people, I think it's time to finally zone it like we mean it, and not just incrementally. That what it becomes again is sprawl.
I agree with Suzanne.
I'd like, Cindy a few minutes ago said something about the fact that you all discuss this in the planning, in the planning office every day, these kinds of issues, and that there are all sorts of, do you really have people on the planning staff right now who think that we should ignore the urban growth boundaries and we should begin to sprawl up and down the valley, or whatever you want to call it?
I don't know if you'd call it that, but I think there are different theories about how to best accommodate our needs. And definitely there's the discussion. If anybody wants to hop in, you're free to hop in, but there are definitely the discussions as to whether or not having more availability of affordability on the corridor is a good idea. And
which means a different balance, or
I don't think balance, I just think it means a different, well, in this case, it's a different land use pattern, allowing the density to be accommodated. And I think that, it's a good debate. I mean, I think that if you went to a lot of the traditional planning type of seminars, they would promote it. They'd promote transit-oriented development. It's been my experience and my theory for us. I'm on the side of maintain our urban growth boundaries, because I feel like we're a 40-mile stretch between Glenwood and Aspen. It sounds like a lot. we really have vital, robust communities that are vital and robust because there are people that live there and work there and play there, and they are distinctly different communities that make us desirable. And one of the concerns I personally have, not only from a land perspective about the visual quality of Pitkin County, but I also have the concern if I were living at oriented development, not within one of those set communities, would I feel I had that I had an identity with a community? And would I have to get in my car to do all my personal stuff, or would the services be available, for us all the time? Those are things that I think about. I know other people think more solidly about affordability and getting people into shelter, and I understand that. But I'll let anybody who has who do disagree with me. I'll let others speak to that, but I feel like here we're in a unique situation where we really only have 14 miles, I think it is, between Aspen and Basalt. And in that 14 miles, we veer off into the town of Snowmass, and we have part of Basalt. And so those are other distinct communities where we can develop either more density or rebalance that density.
I think, Cindy, we've got to also acknowledge that we're making choices, which is, if job generation continues and you don't choose density on your transit pods, you're gonna get it somewhere else. That demand will be met somewhere else, and then you've got your traffic. So you can't get it all, and I think that, I think we're talking in some ways about two things simultaneously: what it looks like and what it feels like. And that the feeling like, I think, is that the people's busyness concern, for the most part, traces to automobile traffic. That's the kind of the overwhelming urban weight. Like, this is not why I'm here, to see and be in lines of cars like this. But that's a consequence of some of these choices we're talking about. And I just want people, to be considering that. It's pretty obvious and simple, but maybe worth stating.
Go ahead, Suzanne.
I'd like to hear, I think that there's some people who are more development oriented on this committee. People who maybe are developers, or who sell land for development reasons, or who just have a completely different philosophy from mine. But I'd like to hear from some of them. Would some of you speak up? Do we have to call names?
Another pointed way to say it is, there anybody here today who would like to speak on behalf of the pearls on the string, or a different type of development pattern, and give the pros for that development pattern? Michael's laid out a good aspect of, the transportation trade-off that we have if we are still creating jobs and bringing people to communities where they don't live as commuters. Come on, there's got to be somewhere.
Well, this is fine. I worked for a developer, but probably not exactly the same kind of developer that we're thinking of. I worked for a very sustainable, oriented, focused developer in Denver. And from that experience, I really feel like there can be great, dense development that is visually appealing, that can help, serve our needs in this community. And from a climate standpoint, as well as an equity standpoint, I think having those dense, transit oriented, even though, that the whole transit is a whole other question, as Michael pointed out, that the transit doesn't always serve the jobs that we need it to, that both from equity and climate change perspective, they're incredibly important to have those pockets closer to where people are working. There's lots of studies that will show you that, the most inefficient apartment in New York City is greener than a off the grid greenest home in a rural community. And so if we're really looking at climate action and greenhouse gas emissions, that's a huge component of that's more in support of that type of development.
So you're saying development within the urban growth boundaries?
Yeah. Yep. And denser. There's a great neighborhood in Denver, and it's a little different situation, but I don't know if anyone's been to the Highlands Gardens neighborhood there. I think it's 18 acres or 29 acres, but it's got an incredible combination of commercial, mixed use, affordable housing, single family, senior housing. It's a really great model, I think, and it's all very visually appealing. That would be interesting to look at.
Kim, did you have your hand up? You should be able to unmute yourself if you want to comment.
Well, I didn't have my hand up, but you asked me to unmute. Nice try. I don't really have anything much to add or contribute, but I do agree with what Phi just said about having the high density, but having it a lot greener. And I think we can probably do that. It's just, I really think it's important to save the corridor coming into town. Totally agree with that. And as I'm looking, it's kind of hard when I'm looking at this map to see the urban growth boundary because it's not really very zoomed in.
Yeah, basically, it's to the end of the runway in the down valley side.
Uh-huh.
And it goes up Red Mountain on the in town and a little bit out to where the water service ends on the east side of town, which is just past Mountain Valley, I think.
So just because of the way things are, no one is going to want that in their backyard, correct? I mean, that's pretty much, it's kind of cost prohibitive, I guess, is what I'm saying, in all those areas that I can see.
Well, that's where, we have a perfect, I know we have some city folks on the line, and jump in if you can, but we have a perfect example of that right now with the city taking the leadership and initiative on the housing question at the Airport Business Center, right where the old existing lumber is today, looking to put, and it goes back and forth in my understanding of how many units, but upwards of 300 to 400 units of density there. And that's within.
Well, and that doesn't have to be ugly either. Or, I mean, if it's well done, it is a good spot. Yeah, I don't know where it's at either. I keep seeing different levels of density. So, be nice to put some housing in Upper Snowmass. I don't know if anybody's ever looked at that. So it doesn't ruin the approach, but it's accessible to both towns.
Yeah, I have recently looked at the Snowmass comprehensive plan, just very, very, not in great detail, but they are absolutely supportive of affordable housing, more affordable housing within the municipal boundary. They're actually pretty protective of what they're calling their influence area outside of the municipal boundary, which is basically Lower Brush Creek Road and Owl Creek Road. So I think they are looking at ways to accommodate affordable housing within their urban area.
That's good news.
So I just wanted to jump in real quick to answer. Suzanne briefly asked earlier who was the contrary opinion in the planning department, and that would actually be me. So put it in perspective I'm an Aspen High School graduate. I've lived in Carbondale most of my life, and I commute up every day. So that's where my different opinion comes from. For me, the joy of this valley is not along the highway. It's the areas behind the highway. It's the rural backcountry. It's those areas that we truly want to preserve. And so my question has always been, is it serve the interest and the preservation of this community better to limit the development in those backcountry areas? So instead of getting the 15,000, the 6,000, the 4,000 square foot houses up in the old Snowmass area, up on like Castle Creek, Maroon Creek, all of these areas that are beautiful and gorgeous and the places I actually associate with Aspen, does it serve us better to locate that more along the highway, which is already, in my opinion, a pretty ugly stretch, not because of the views, because of the amount of cars and traffic that's already there.
Yeah.
And be able to move that closer to that highway. And that would be that balancing of it to try and get workers close, which reduces our greenhouse gas emissions. And the other part of that for me is density tends to come at height. And I don't think any of us wants to see 5-story, 8-story buildings in Aspen or in the UGB. And that allowing us to spread it along the highway allows us to kind of prevent that prohibitive height. Because that's really where that contention is for me, is we can say greater density, but part of the Aspen, of the ABC area, is you're not allowed to go above a certain height. So we have these things that are battling with each other with that restriction. And so that's really where my opinion was. I believe we should do above and beyond to protect our areas like the Crystal Valley, the Maroon Creek Valley, Castle Creek, all of these wonderful, beautiful amenities that make the town, and really focus the development where it makes sense, which to me has always been along the highway. So that was that contrary opinion.
Actually, I like that.
Zach,
You just convinced me.
you mean anywhere along the highway, or are there areas that make more sense than others?
I think there are areas that need to be preserved. I mean, I don't think Snowmass Canyon should ever get touched. I think to me, the entrance to Aspen is not nearly as beautiful as the entrance to Snowmass. When I'm coming up valley and I look right and you look up that valley to Snowmass Village, that's, I think, one of the best views out there. And I think that should really be preserved. So within limit, I believe there are definitely pockets that should be preserved as green space and for view, but that stretch on the right side of the highway from Brush Creek down, I don't really see a lot of value in keeping that open, except for the Brush Creek residents who get to maintain. They don't have to look down on development. That's just a personal opinion. It is by no means the opinion of the community development department. That is just from having grown up here for 20 years and commuting up the valley.
No, and I really appreciate, thank you for standing up, Zach, and talking about your perspective. I just want to let everybody know that, I think we have these healthy debates among us, and we try to learn from one another. So, Suzanne, did you have your hand up?
Well, I was just going to tell Zach that I thought he was very brave because no one else was going to tell on him. And Zach, I think it's also especially important that you have those thoughts, which certainly have a lot of wisdom in them, and that you grew up here. That's important. I'm still also wondering, are there people on the panel or attending the meeting today who are in the private sector as land use attorneys largely, or in the real estate community, or I know at least one person that has been attending has been a land use planner in the public sector, and then a land use consultant in the private sector.
There too.
And so, Joe, do you have any thoughts
Wrapped in.
about that? Guess not.
Yeah.
Hi, it's Joe Wells. I like to refer to myself as retired, so.
Oh,
Nice.
I didn't want to invest the time that some of you are investing in this effort because I have a caucus to look after. I have been submitting comments in writing and find that that's my best way of communicating with the group. And we'll continue to do that.
So are you saying no comment right now?
No comment, no.
and so are those comments, Cindy, are those comments in the record somewhere so that we could read them?
Yep, I think we just some comment, specifically about Castle Creek and short-term rentals. And yeah, I mean, Joe understands that anything he gives us is public record, and we will post those if we haven't already. I'm not sure if we have or not, but yeah, things that we get, we try to give it to everyone to see.
So interestingly, we do have some people on the chat function who are agreeing with Zach. It's okay to speak up, but the chat function works too. So a couple of people at least here saying, yeah, that maybe we should consider some development along highway nodes. Not all development has to be super tall, high, or hideous is one of the words that someone chose to use. But so there is some interest, sounds like, in the potential for identifying nodes for some development potential along the highway. I don't know, is that an accurate statement? Although there obviously are several people who've expressed an interest in really going the other direction and keeping the status quo.
And it sounds like some want to talk about, just the whole interaction between the landscape, land use patterns, and transit, and have that discussion. Yeah, I mean, well, let's talk, bring up what more we want to look at. Yeah, it is definitely an issue that we have people traveling so far to serve the Aspen community or other communities. Are there other corridors we could look at beyond the highway as ways to maintain our corridor, our character? Zach, you're muted. Zach, you're muted. Well, I like the fact that.
Am I
I was just
unmuted?
going to read out Rachel's comment real quick. I told her I'd get to it and didn't have a gap in the conversation there. So for those of you who didn't see it in chat, it says, this is by Rachel. She says, I think it's important that we talk about transit and TOD, that we look at other forms of transit. We have a large number of workers traveling 80 miles a day to work in Aspen. Is there a way to diversify the transit options beyond auto and buses? Bike transit is one we already have. Could there be other corridors that we look at for TOD beyond the highway as a way to maintain the character we currently enjoy?
And I'd like to say that there have been many, many, many studies on this, but the more recent one was with a group of citizens that held, I think, about a year-long or more seminar hosted through the Aspen Institute, and it was made up of citizens throughout the area to look at just that question. And there's a study on that that I'm not sure we have posted, Zach, but we can. And the recommendations that came out of that were many, but looking at ways of getting, encouraging some newer models of, people basically picking up other riders along the way, and helping to encourage and incentivize that. There was some amazing statistics in that. If we only got like 1.78 people per car, we would basically solve a lot of our congestion problems that we have today, which says a lot about single occupancy vehicles.
I was part of that. Just I'll add to what Cindy said. That I think that one of the big takeaways from what the group recommended was that it was mostly no infrastructure solutions. It was largely sort of technology solutions, ride sharing, ride hailing, a way like so many disruptors like Airbnb and Uber have done, which is trying to make use of unused capacity through technology, mainly the empty seats in people's cars coming into town.
And we'll try to get that study on our website so people can take a look at it.
May I say something? Okay, I like what you said, Zachary, about keeping our backcountry beautiful. And I've been thinking about that. And that's another reason for maybe doing some berming, so that if we do have some development along the highway, that you don't see it, where it doesn't then look like you're just going from one town to another. Anyway, I thought that was a good suggestion that you had.
Thank you.
And the woman who mentioned the Highlands Garden and that makes a lot of sense, because sometimes developments can be beautiful if they're done correctly. And so maybe we should think more of that type of thing. Anyway, I'll shut up from here on.
Hi, this is Lindsay.
Hi,
I'm
Lindsay.
I'm with the Aspen Chamber. I'm actually from the DC area, and one of the unique things that the DC area does is called slugging and slug lines into the city, because there's a lot of HOV restrictions going in from Western Virginia into the DC area. And so that's just maybe something to look at as far as how to structure, kind of those commuter pickup spots and getting people into the city without everyone having their own cars.
Thanks. It's kind of what people do when they want to park at Highlands on a ski day, where you need more people in the car to park for free.
So this was the next question we had on it. Just if you have anything to comment on the last one, please, we're always open to hear on it. But just wanted to, in that lull there, we did have a couple other things that we were suggesting that we've heard mentioned in the past as well.
Yeah, and I think that, we talk about the buying down. We've talked about that balancing the existing inventory instead of constructing new affordable housing, either within the urban growth boundary or pockets along the highway. you know, and maybe what we should talk about is a little bit with this group, you know, if things could work for a rebalance within an urban growth boundary, you know, is that a preference? Do we have some sort of a prioritization we can take away from this discussion? You know, how would people rank the different alternative development patterns, if you will, that we've discussed today? Not to say that there aren't others that we might want to look at, but is there a ranking that people would like to look at in terms of moving forward with this topic? Is there some agreement that we can come to? I'm taking the silence as everyone is just as perplexed about the right.
You're right.
You know, Cindy, I'll say that I think, you know, I know that this does, well, I guess with it, you know, you're talking further down valley, but, you know, this is you know, is somewhat similar to a Peter Fornell idea, which is, you know, like, let's allow some stuff to be rezoned that's residential into multifamily and things like that, because you'll actually see private developers with the credit market who will come in and say, you know what, I mean, like it's happening with Aspen Housing Partners, right? Like, and I don't think there needed to be any rezoning there, but the place at 7th and Main, that is my new next door neighbor, and elsewhere, that, you know, you've got a, maybe not a high value piece of land because of its proximity to the traffic and things like that, that if it can be rezoned, and it doesn't have to be 5 stories high, that, you know, I think that, I mean, your question here, I don't know if it means that there's no tear down involved or, you know, versus building something entirely new, but I do think that there are properties, you know, the one that went in here in Basalt, that's right on the highway there, that was where they were able to save the kind of the foundation of the building, the Real America project, I think is an example maybe of what you're talking about here a little bit, or some variation of it. But I think less sort of impactful vehicle trip inducing solutions are always going to be attractive here.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Michael, about, are we just talking buy down? Are we talking about redevelopment of properties within the urban growth boundary in that portion of the discussion?
Well, while we're all pondering that, I'm going to throw one more thing at all of you. The other question we had relates to the zoning. Are there potentially pockets that we feel are worthwhile zoning for larger homes or for greater density within the county due to the accessibility of services or of the existing development that's already there? And just a quick example, those areas that are circled are areas where we predominantly already see a lot of the larger homes go. So is it maybe worthwhile for us to focus on pushing those kind of development there and maybe doing something different for the other areas? Do we want something else to go in the other areas? It could really be taken as broadly or specifically as you would like.
Is that the Drosty property that you've got on the left circle on the sort of in the middle of the screen, the big one? Yeah.
This is Owl Creek.
Right.
So this is, I mentioned it when we were discussing the exemptions at the end of last meeting. This is where that low impact residential zone already exists to some extent, which allows them to build up to 8,250 square feet automatically. And then we do see a number of homes that are beyond that 5,750 square foot exemption there frequently as well. This is, I tried to put it as close to Starwood as I could. We see a number of larger homes go here as well. Larger relating again to our growth management system. This is Red Hill. So I think we're all familiar with that. And then this is east of Aspen, where the Caucus Master Plan currently is endorsing the max house size of 15,000 square feet.
Yeah, so for a little background here, the county, there's several county master plans in existence, and in some areas like Snowmass, Capitol Creek, Caucus area, there's been really a clear recommendation from that caucus to maintain a smaller, relative speaking, a smaller house size. The Frying Pan caucus said, hey, you know what? Our character is smaller, rural, mountainous. We want smaller homes up here. But there are other caucus areas like the Owl Creek caucus area that said in their master plan, large homes are okay. We really don't have an issue with them. And then there's some areas that the county has recognized as being consisting mostly of large homes, like the Starwood subdivision, which Zach has circled there. And so there, and then everybody knows outside of Aspen, up on Red Mountain Road, there are a lot of large homes there. They're in close proximity to town. So should we be acknowledging that these areas may be okay for large homes, larger than the standard limitation in the county of 5,750 square feet, recognizing that there are impacts associated with the services these larger homes result in a need for, and the resulting impacts of those services. I don't know if that helps by way of a little bit of background.
Zach,
Yes, Suzanne.
would you put the screen up again that lists your question, the wording of the question?
And while Suzanne is looking at that, or all of us are looking at that, I think that it's also a little bit of kind of land use growth pattern background to talk about, TDRs and the use of TDRs today, the way we have the system where the urban growth boundary is more, where we look at the higher densities or more development. As we go out, we get to the rural and remote zone district from which the transferable development rights come. And those transferable development rights today, as we learned earlier, and there's just a lot going on, that those can either be used as a development right within the urban growth boundary or as square footage, pretty much anywhere in the county where residential development is allowed. And that's used in 2,500 square foot increments. So the communities that have master plans that talk about allowing 15,000 square foot homes are what Zach pointed out earlier. The east of Aspen allows up to a 15,000 square foot home in that district, in that area. Owl Creek allows up to 15,000 square feet in that area. I think Red Mountain, you can get that high, a square footage, and then I'm forgetting another one, but there are areas where, the master plans have looked at that and said, hey, we have that existing pattern of development. We think it's appropriate for us, and we'd like to still be able to use transferable development rights in our locations to have the larger homes. So that's what we were pointing out.
Suzanne?
So I was just reading the question again, and the choice seems to be focus on larger homes or greater density. That's a pretty wide spectrum. And do you think that if the areas that you've outlined would ever tolerate greater density so that we could get to a more ideal scenario like Michael was talking about a few minutes ago, where people can live closer to their work? Can you imagine Red Mountain homeowners agreeing or going along with, we also want some appropriately placed smaller homes?
Well, Suzanne, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the form of looking at rezoning. I think there have been other communities that have had some great ideas within their urban boundaries, if you will, that look at allowing doubling the density on a lot. You know, Carbondale uses that in their downtown core. You could have a second unit on your property, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a caretaker or a grandmother type unit. It could be sold separately. You know, look at different ways of approaching it in different locations from a density perspective. And I think you're right when you look at the wording that we had. It's kind of almost two separate questions. You know, are there places where we can look at more density, and are there places where we think larger homes are appropriate?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and this map solely focuses on the larger homes. So if we had a map to match that other half of the question, we'd probably have a circle around the ABC area and a circle around Aspen Village and maybe one around the Woody Creek Trailer Park. So they don't have to be together. They can be completely separate. This map is solely focused on the first part of that question. So that might have caused some of that confusion.
Is there anybody here that has been waiting to discuss the home size issue today in association with, the broader discussion? It's just a language pattern discussion. Have we zoned it like we mean it? And what does that look like? And what does that look like in terms of spaces and the things that we've talked about? Michael's question of, that how do people get to their jobs in these areas? And maybe those are things that we look at when we look in our growth management scoring system. If someone is looking to get additional footage in the growth management scoring system, how does one approach that not only affordable but transportation aspect of getting people to
Cindy, can I ask a question and you can tell me whether it fits within this portion of the conversation or not? Because I feel like, I know that you like to point to some of the things like the Aspen Area Community Plan and find those points of reference that kind of offer some clarity and guidance to the value side of some of these land use questions and trying to figure out if the zoning is aligning with the values. And, I've looked at the previous two pretty closely over the years and the community, and I am not attempting to disparage or malign the residential construction and second home industry right now, but looking objectively at those documents, they say that the community has concern about this sort of consistent drift, which really has become more like a beeline of our economy being defined by that industry. Like the workforce side, the hiring power of that industry just for a house manager now. Like, being a house manager of 2 or 3 homes is a higher paying gig than being, than a lot of other things that are needed jobs for our community to function. And is this the appropriate time to sort of ask the question, to what degree is what we're talking about, this sector coming to define our economy in this valley in ways that we never really asked for it to? It just sort of happened. And like, how do we unpack that and look at these questions you're asking us in that bigger picture light of, do we want an economy, the economy that we have? And if so, great. If not, what are the aspects of it we don't like? And how do we do things within the context of this discussion that would steer it in a direction that the community has asked for it to go in successive Aspen community plans?
Great broad questions.
Well, I don't think we are going to, we don't really have enough time to delve in great detail and into the large home question. We did want to introduce it, and there will be time to talk more about large homes and unintended issues that arise from those large homes, including the industry generated by them. That's definitely an important consideration, and something that I think we will want to focus on when we do spend a little bit more time on the topic of TDRs and large homes. Cindy, I don't know if we want to take, I don't know if anybody has comments in direct response to Michael's bringing up the issue. Now, that would be great. Otherwise, we will definitely wrap that into future discussions.
Sorry if that took us off track.
It did not. No, it's perfectly relevant.
Is there anybody who wants to address the map that Zach brought up relative to location? Is it appropriate to have various locations in Picken County that allow differing house sizes? We already have it to a certain extent because of the caucus master plans, and then those being made into code requirements based on citizen input. The most recent example being the Maroon Creek caucus area asked to be limited to 5,750 square feet for the size of their homes. Mentioned earlier, Snowmass Cap kind of split out those two drainages, with one allowing larger up to 15 and the other side of the valley saying, nope, we don't want to go above 8,250.
Suzanne?
Seems to me, Cindy, that first we have to have the house size question asked and answered from this group before we decide where larger houses go. I mean, what if this group ends up recommending another serious look at house sizes? And if we don't want them, then we don't have to figure out where to put them.
And maybe that's too much for today. We haven't really given a lot of background on that for you to chew on. This time we really attempted not to give you too much material to read or digest before the meeting, because we got feedback that maybe there was too much and people weren't absorbing it. But how would the group like to go on that? Would you like to start that discussion today about house size and whether or not we should continue to look at house size in the way we do today, and or should we be looking at limitations on house size? We gave you some early information, I think in the very first meeting,
Mhm.
a mix of those units that we have today, the average house size in Pitkin County being somewhere around, I think it was 3,300 square feet, 3,400 square feet. But obviously having larger homes that are allowed through zoning today, up to 15,000 square feet.
I think it'd be great to have that in another discussion. And I think you'd get a lot of participation if we really specified that's what we're going to talk about.
I agree with Kim. And my suggestion wasn't that we do it now, because I think we need to stick to the plan that you already have, but that there's an order in which those questions should come whenever they come up.
So we really can't have that land use pattern discussion, including house size, until we talk about house size as a topic in itself.
That's what I think.
That's what I think.
If everybody feels that way, then that's fine. And does anybody have any questions about how that fits into the whole growth pattern with transferable development rights, or anything we can answer today since we have a little time?
Cindy, it's Meg. I would agree that the house size discussion should be a separate item and not today.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
I have a question relating to that. Our original intent was to split the house size discussion into two forms. House size that was exempt from growth management, which is currently the 5,750, and maximum house size as two separate discussions. Does that sound appropriate to everybody? Would you like to just have that conversation as one lump sum, discussing the entirety of it together at once?
Say the two options again.
So there's either we have two separate conversations relating to house size. One is the house size that is by right. So you don't have to go through growth management or anything like that. You submit your planning application and you're automatically okay for that house size if it's under a certain amount. And then there's the maximum house size. So what's the maximum size of a house that you're allowed to build? So that it can either be two separate conversations, or that can be one big conversation relating to house size in general.
And I think, Kim, the question, to put it a little bit more directly, is that, is 5,750 square feet still the appropriate square footage? Should it be larger? Should it be smaller? And then the maximum house size, is that still the appropriate square footage?
So my take is that we probably need to frame the discussion better in a more thorough fashion for the group, so that the questions that we're asking are really clear. And for hearing that is definitely a conversation, perhaps for the next meeting. And I think we did get some good, unless someone wants to, certainly there's a little bit of time here if anyone wants to talk about that particular topic before we launch into a more complete discussion in the next meeting. But I think we did get some good feedback on just the overall question about development patterns as they exist today, and whether or not they should persist, or perhaps we should consider some potential changes. And so thank you for that. Basically, I think what we heard was that sprawl, which is a broad term, really isn't supported by anybody, but that there may be some room for some developmental in specific pockets, as long as it's not too out of scale But for the most part, I think people do not support the overall concept of sprawl, but there may be some room for some change in specific areas with some regulations in place.
And I'd also like to add that Michael's thoughts about, you know, overlaying for Pitkin County anyway, what we're looking at relative to where those jobs are created, and really is what pattern of growth relates the best to Pitkin County's impacts relative to jobs. So.
I think one more thing maybe to consider getting there, which shouldn't be too hard, is RAFTA's ridership numbers. You know, so looking and seeing which stops you know, people are getting onto the bus at, and you know, Zach, you mentioned that Carbondale, in like the people number is the big out commuter because of its population being so much bigger than Basalt's. But in that regional transit study, I mean, it's a shocking statistic. 90% of the people who have homes in Basalt and have jobs leave Basalt to do that job. 90% of the people. And 85% of the jobs in Basalt are filled by people who don't live in Basalt. I mean, it is a 90, like on average, it's an 87% commuter town between those two numbers.
Wow.
Yeah, it's this study, I think, I don't know, Zach, if you haven't put this up, this is a great one to put up for the group, just because the commuter pattern side of this is incredibly enlightening, and the executive summary of the report is very well written. It's a really easy read, and if anybody wants to wonk out, they can.
That's amazing.
I believe it is up on our webpage, correct, Zach?
So we have the regional housing study. I believe Michael's referring to the RAFTA transit study.
No, I'm referring to the regional housing study, which you know, which originally was intended to be a housing demand study, but it also has a commuter pattern side to it that I personally find, you know, even more interesting.
Yeah, that study is up. I mean, yeah, there's some mind-blowing numbers. I mean, 90% of Glenwood's jobs are filled from the Rifle Below area, and then a lot of Glenwood's are being exported up. So it really kind of, you go to the next town. So Carbondale goes to Basalt and Aspen, Basalt goes to Aspen, Rifle and Newcastle go to Glenwood. It's kind of like a dominoes up the valley. But yeah, that study is up there. And that data, if anybody's looking for, it starts on page 62 is where you start hitting the commuter trend. So I understand it is a very long report, and most of us probably don't want to go read the whole thing. So if you're looking for that data that Michael's referring to, it starts on page 62 of that study, and that is underneath the intensity and impact section of our webpage.
I think it speaks to affordability, doesn't it? And wages.
I also, I'm going to put a link up to the presentation that was given by Gabe, and I can't remember her name right now, but she's with the Economic Department of Colorado. Jessica. So Gabe and Jessica gave an update on the economic indicators that we've seen in Picken County since the beginning of the pandemic on Tuesday to the BOCC. So I will find that, I will timestamp it. So when you click on it, it'll jump you right to the right moment, and I'll put that up on our website. So I know there's a lot of concern over the changes we're seeing in the short term, and they had a lot of really good data. So I will find that and put that up on the webpage for everybody to go and see as well.
It's great data. And for those of you who asked us for some of that data, I know, I think it was John Doyle, you asked for some airplane employments statistics and maybe it was just traffic, but we have some of that in that report that went to the board on Tuesday. So hopefully you can find what you need there. I didn't want to take up too much time today with it. If you have more questions on that, we have more data behind it. Well, I don't want to waste anybody's time. If nobody else has anything they want to contribute to today's discussion, thank you again for being here. We will continue on this path, take comments from you, post those comments, and continue on. But please let us know if we're not giving you enough information, if we're giving you too much information, ways that you think we can make these conversations even better. So thank you. Appreciate it. And thank you so much for all your time and thoughts on important topics.
As always, please feel free to email me any questions or concerns, or if you need help accessing any of these studies, please feel free to reach out to me and I will get back to you and make sure that you have access to them. And I'd also like to thank you for your time.
Thanks,
Yep.
Zach.
Thanks, everybody.
And hopefully we will see you again next week, same time, same place. And we'll send out packet information ahead of time.
Thank you.